Welcome, everyone. We'll continue to let you in from the waiting room. Good to see all of your beautiful faces, lots of familiar ones. My name is Tiago Forte. You probably know me. And this is a casual little interview, fireside chat that I've been looking forward to for a long, long time. I first came across a book called Work Clean probably a year or two ago. And I found it fascinating, at once foreign, because if you know anything about my cooking skills, I don't belong in a kitchen. And at the same time, there were these little themes and patterns and principles that felt utterly familiar because of their relationship to productivity and efficiency and effectiveness and producing outcomes, which is really what I'm all about, as you know. And I feel very fortunate that I was able to reach out to Dan, and he has graciously agreed to chat with us about his work, about his book, and the ideas contained within it. We have an hour. I'm going to spend the first maybe 5 or 10 minutes asking a few of my questions. I'm going to be a little selfish here. But then the rest of the time, we're going to open up the floor to all of you to ask questions, talk about the relationships of work clean ideas to your work, to your business, to your life, and generally just have what I'm sure is going to be a just fascinating discussion about these really deep principles about honesty and efficiency and food and what it means to do excellent work and to really be a person of excellence in the world. Sound good? Okay. So Dan, I'm going to lead with my first question, which is also by way of introduction. For someone who has never heard of you, doesn't know about all the different things you've written, and I think you even produced a TV show, like how would you introduce yourself? And as part of that, maybe you could tell us what led you to invest what I assume was years of your life and countless hours writing an entire book on mise-en-place.
It's very true. Excuse me. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here and even thinking of me. It's great. It's lovely. It's just lovely to meet people, and especially lovely to meet people who are on this path of trying to figure out how to exist in this world of work and do it in a way that's sane and feeds us rather than drains us. And to answer your question, that's where this all came from. If I describe myself as an author, professor, and producer, but that really doesn't tell the story. I come from the music business. I come from hip hop. I was actually one of the first sort of executives in the American music business, focusing primarily and exclusively on hip hop in the late 80s, early 1990s. I wrote for the very first rap magazine, of any kind of international stature called The Source. Worked for a small record company when I got out of college called Profile Records, which was the home of, if you might remember, Run DMC and Rob Bass and, hip hop acts like that. And then I went to work for many years for a guy by the name of Rick Rubin, who was a co-founder of a record company called Def Jam. He's the person who discovered and produced LL Cool J, the Beastie Boys. And of course, now Rick has this huge production career that has taken him from Red Hot Chili Peppers to Johnny Cash to Adele to Kanye. So that's whence I come. And as part of that trajectory, at the age of 25 or 26, I found myself basically as an executive at Warner Brothers Records because of all this. And I had no training. I was a natural sort of planner, worrier, Virgo, type A person, and I had a bachelor's of arts and bachelor's of science, and I graduated summa cum laude and all that, but I had never received a training in how to manage a workload, which is very, very different. And if you don't know how to manage a workload, that can also quickly get you focused on the wrong priorities, and that can be troublesome to a career. as it was troublesome to mine. I sought out naturally some of the great uh, personal organization minds of the day. I don't know if any of you remember Stephen Covey, and then Dave Allen after him. It was really good, like principle-oriented organization. But I think the real epiphany for me came not from any of those folks, but from listening to Anthony Bourdain's audiobook for Kitchen Confidential back in
Totally.
2000, the first time. And, you know, of course, the book was wildly successful because it's filled with these incredible, nobody had ever really done a narrative about the life of a chef. They did cookbooks, right? But this was way before we had, you know, the Cooking Channel and the Food Network and all of that stuff. And so it was popular, I think, for that, and also because he's an incredible raconteur. But at the kernel, at the core of all this chaos, like the eye of a hurricane, was this calm little area called mise-en-place, and that fascinated me. Here's a guy who, you know, was undisciplined in so many ways, but his mise-en-place had to be just so, right? And he took very seriously his commitment to his job, to his work, to his colleagues. That was fascinating to me. And as I took other executive jobs, first in tech and then in, you know, in media, in the web, editorial for the web, I began to really, I don't know, this is a very long answer to your question, Tiago, so I hope
I
I'm
love
not.
it. No, this, and I see all the traces and the early signs that led you to, you know, the book that we're here to talk about. So I think
Yeah.
this is all incredibly enriching.
Thank you. So essentially, I worked in places and spaces. Some of them were startups, some of them were public corporations. And I really found myself being very envious of what it would be like to work in an environment where everybody was sort of had to be honest with each other and honest with the work. Many of you have probably worked in these situations where you're on a team and you really want to do well, and something gets constricted. The budget gets constricted, time gets constricted, hiring gets constricted, and your boss says something to the effect of, well, we're just going to have to do more with less. And that is okay in certain aspects and for certain stretches of time, but it is not a business model. And I grew increasingly frustrated with that disingenuousness in work. Another thing that went along with it is, you know, we're all a family here. We're a family, right? We're not a family. So and also seeing myself having mise-en-place, but not being able to account for the fact that the people who I worked for often did not have good mise-en-place. So all of that was sort of brewing in my mind. And I had already published my first book, which was a huge 40-year history of the hip hop business called The Big Payback, which was, as Tiago said, later turned into a movie and a TV series. And in this sort of lull after the book, I became really interested in, it started actually, I wanted to create just some software for myself to use that would sort of embody some of these principles. And then I thought, well, you know, what I really know how to do, I haven't really created an app on my own, but I know that I can write a book. So I just decided to use the tools of a reporter. You know, I forgot to mention I went back to school and got my master's in journalism before all of this stuff. But I used the tools of a reporter to actually break down this idea of mise-en-place. And of course, for a lot of books that are on the market, they start with the revelation that there is no book that speaks to this thing yet. And if I want to read it, then I have to write it. So that's what I did. I just spent 2 years interviewing chefs, students, teachers, restaurant executives, people in different walks of life about organization, to turn this very inchoate notion of mise-en-place into a system that we could use. And that's what drove that project. That is a very long answer to your question, but that's the real deal.
No, I love it. It's such a cool path you've walked. And I mean, you said so many things that I could echo and repeat. I think from all the heads nodding, I think you guys got it. But I will highlight one thing you said that really speaks to me. And you mentioned it in the book as well. By the way, Bethany, could you drop a link to Work Clean in the chat, just in case anyone wants to pick it up? Which is like telling the truth. You know, I worked, before founding this business, I worked in a corporate environment, and it just amazed me that like corporate speak, the way you have to communicate in a corporation is just different shades of lying, right? It's like all the ways you have to just massage and sort of go around and avoid feelings and not say that word, even though you want to say that. Like it took up so much of my bandwidth. I felt like when I left the corporate environment, I could just say things. I got like 20% of my brain capacity back. And I think since then I've long had this mantra, which is tell the truth, which when people first hear that, they go, oh, that's easy. That just means don't lie. But it's so much more than that. Like not lying, that's like the basic level, right? But then there's so many shades on the other side of telling the truth. There's so many depths to truth. There's ways of speaking it. There's ways of actually standing for it.
Right.
Actually saying, no, I'm not just going to say it. This is the truth, and I'm going to declare it. That I just keep uncovering different facets of what it means to tell the truth. And I think what your book really speaks to is like the sort of nugget, the core of that, which is telling the truth to yourself. If you can't tell the truth to yourself, who else are you going to tell the truth to?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I would actually build on what you're saying by adding that I think a lot of what we do, especially in corporate situations, is it's varying degrees of hiding from the truth. And the great example of that in the kitchen, listen, it takes a certain amount of time to prepare a dish. You cannot save the making of the rice or the polenta till just before service, because it takes hours. Well, it takes a certain amount of minutes to create rice, but hours to do polenta, right? There's this great story from Bill Buford's book Heat, about working in the kitchen at Babbo and learning how to make polenta, and realizing that if you left it to the last minute or you forgot it and you made instant, the chef would come and say, you're really trying to lose me my Michelin stars, aren't you? You're really trying to ruin me. It takes certain time to create quality. And I think that, listen, oftentimes we can bend time. We can do things that are miraculous, but it also takes, on a personal level and on the level of a group engaged in work, to look at things realistically. Is this sustainable, right? For all of us. Is it? And it's again, it starts on the personal level. I've given myself 15 things to do today, in addition to the 3 appointments that I have on my calendar. It ain't gonna happen. Yeah. And believe me, I still struggle with this. Yeah. Knowing what I know, it is the most painful thing to face every day in the morning when I do my 30-minute, mise routine. What can't I do? What can't I do? But ultimately, when I do reckon with that, I can breathe better. I'm in a better mood. I get I do the jobs that I have assigned myself a little better. But I've also learned some things since I wrote the book too, which I'm happy to share as we go forward. But that, again, just to pivot off of what you were saying, yes, it is about telling the truths to ourselves primarily, first thing every day. That's what mise-en-place is.
I do. Yeah, I do. That is one of my questions here. I want to ask how it's evolved and changed. But before that, I want to kind of address so this was one of the kinds of comments that I saw when my article, which was the takeaways from your book, was posted in various places. What do you say to the person, let's say just in the extreme case, who says mise en place has nothing to do with me? I'm a knowledge worker. Cooking is formulaic and repetitive and predictable. I'm a, let's just say, software developer. My work is novel and creative and unpredictable. What is like your, like, I'm sure you've heard that. Like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I have heard that mostly from chefs who didn't really get it. It's funny. I think knowledge workers actually do get it a little bit more than chefs. Like, but look, I think that everybody has routines. Everybody has times when they have to immerse themselves in certain things and have their hands in certain things, whether it's creating a dish in a kitchen or creating a PowerPoint presentation or working on a particular batch of code or an iteration of an app or whatever that might be. A meeting is also can be immersive too, like a brainstorming meeting with your colleagues. And we all have process tasks as well, right? Executive functions and communications that we need to administer. And really what mise-en-place is just a way to manage time and resources and energies and our virtual spaces in a way that doesn't drive us crazy and gets as much good work done as we can get. Yeah. That's what we take from mise-en-place. And there's a section in We're Clean where I deal with a little bit of those questions as well. There are differences. A cook will come in and do the same thing every day. The recipes are always the same. So those are our challenges, right? How do we continually pivot and yet maintain healthy routines for ourselves?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. So one more question and then we'll open it up to the to audience questions. I'd love to know. So I find with my own, writing and advice giving that it's always like there's like 10 or 20 or 30% of it that lasts and that really lasts for years and sort of remains after all the details and the extra stuff has passed away. I'm curious, like for you, and I guess this is kind of related to how it's evolved and changed, but what do you find in your own life are the enduring principles or habits or practices that after all this time you still do for your own work?
It's funny. In addition to, you made me think of something from a previous life. I did not mention that for the last 30 years, I've also been a trained yoga practitioner and instructor. Mm-hmm. And my teacher used to say to us, I didn't come here to amass students. I came here to train teachers. And to master something, you must teach it. Frankly, the reason I suspect you teach, and I know that I teach, is that I can master the very subject that I'm teaching, right? That's what we all have to do. Your learning will go up like this if you all begin to teach other people what you've learned. And so to answer your question, I think the things that have stuck with me are the most fundamental parts, which is you have to have a routine every day. You have to, and what if you feed that planning routine, you will reap the benefits of that. What I've learned though, And this is also part of mise-en-place. It's not necessarily a departure from it. It's just a more flexible kind of mise-en-place. And I'll tell you a story about writing this book. I wrote the book in 2015. Submitted it in 2015, and then it came out in 2016. And the book launched right in the middle of my TV movie turning into a TV series. And I knew that I could not do both. That was my larger life mise-en-place. Like, oh, am I going to be able to create this app and do the sequel book that I want to do, and do teaching, and do this other thing, and teach at a university at the same time, and be a father and a husband? I had to choose. And so I made a very difficult choice to put less into that work because of the other things that were going on. And I have also seen myself in these projects that come through. I'm not a corporate guy. I have an artist temperament, and I like to immerse myself in a project. I'm not a people manager. I'm good. I can be good with people, but it's not really what I do. So for the last 2 years, I have been engaged in writing another book about a musical figure. Some of you will probably know, most of you will probably not know, a producer from Detroit by the name of Jay Dilla. Never had a biography before or anything explaining what he means to the music world. So that was what I was engaged in for 2 years. And while that happened, I often left behind my process work, including my morning mise, because I was allowing myself to actually have a larger dynamic. Like it's not going to be a daily routine for me now. It might be more of a weekly routine, because the only way I can finish is to go in. Writing a book is sort of like being in a rowboat all by yourself in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and you can't see the shore behind you and you can't see the shore ahead of you. And I had to give myself into that immersion. And so now I pressed send on July 11th, and the last 3-4 weeks, it's been like going through all the Evernote notes that I left for myself for the past year, things that I left aside, getting back on top of. So I had immersive year, and now I might have more of a process year. Mm-hmm. And that's, a marketing year, a talking to people and doing things like this year. As a human being, depending on your temperament, it's not just a daily practice, but sometimes you have to allow for the ebbs and flows of your own life and give yourself permission to not be on top of things, to not up Periscope, to not answer every email, to not empty the email inbox. That's okay, as long as you have that trust in yourself that if that kind of thing is important to you and you don't have a personal assistant, that you will come back to it at some point. So yeah, that's kind of what I've learned.
I hope you all really are absorbing this, because I feel like this is one of like the deep productivity that I think most people don't know exists, and most people don't get to. Is like, I think people tend to treat like a piece of productivity advice that they hear from some, author or guru or someone, and they hear the advice and they go, okay, this is an absolute rule. It must never change. It must be implemented as this absolute unchanging thing. The problem is, if you collect enough of those, soon you're basically in a prison of completely fixed, unchanging, absolute principles that, by the way, contradict each other. Right? Like, focus on one thing, be open to possibilities. Like they're actually not compatible. When what I took from what you're saying is the flexibility, the fluidity. Everything is fluid. Everything is on a spectrum. And you're sort of cycling or pendulating, or I almost think of it like breathing in and out between one extreme and the other, between one principle and the opposing principle. It's really very Zen.
Yeah, man. Exactly right. It's exactly right. And isn't that, we want philosophies, uh, spiritualities, and principles that give us life rather than make us feel the other way, right? And it's never a thing. Oh, I mean, that's in mise-en-place. It's never the thing of, okay, I've got it. I can relax now. I've got the philosophy. No, because our situations change, our world changes, facts on the ground change, our needs change. Um, we have to constantly re-examine things, and that is also part of a meditative, or the importance of a meditative practice. Being still, looking at things, visualizing things. That's all mise-en-place is. The chef is just visualizing her day, right? What am I going to be doing? What are my footsteps going to be? And the more that you are able to plan and account for that, the more nimble you'll be when something else comes up and you have to sidestep it.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I just flashed on, the whole thing that we're seeing now in Kabul, in Afghanistan, right? The preparedness and unpreparedness, and the sort of the national and international reckoning that we have with our ability to plan, and not having done so, lack of vision, do we have enough foresight, just some thoughts.
Absolutely. I love it. Such broadly applicable principles. All of these are, I think. Okay, wow, time is flying. We're having a lot of fun. I have other questions, but I want to give you guys lots of chances here. Let's go ahead and use the raise hand feature. If you click I think it's reactions button on the Zoom toolbar and then raise hand, I'll call on you. And please just be very direct, go straight to the question. And if Dan or I need more background or more details or more context, we'll ask for it. But otherwise, let's try to hit as many of these questions as we can, starting with Dean.
Good morning, Tiago. Hi, Dan. Thank you for sharing.
Hi.
Quick question. So I'm a young parent, new parent. I want to understand from your perspective, why is it that some professionals get mise-en-place in certain aspects of their life, and then other aspects of their life, it just doesn't happen? So for me, organizing the kids, cleaning the house, that gets done. That just gets done. But work, I go through like rabbit holes of just projects and get lost, and that's why I've sort of engaged with Tiago's work to get a handle on this. From your perspective, why is that the case, that we can't implement in certain facets of our life, but others it just comes naturally?
Well, I think that there are certain imperatives, right, that come with child rearing, right? The need of our children, whether it be to talk to us, or we got to feed them, or tend to a small emergency, or whatever it is, right? Those are imperatives, and our actions are very clear in those instances, and they're also routine, right? So we know what to do. Again, the problem of knowledge workers, as we've said before, is that it's a lot of new stuff coming at you. And it sounds to me, I don't mean to diagnose from afar, but it just sounds like if you can find some quiet time to assess your day, assess the day ahead, and also it may also have to do a little bit with just anxiety, that work causes more anxiety and more second guessing than raising your children. You're probably a good dad, right? And maybe those actions come more naturally to you, or without kind of self-doubt, that the working world can. That was actually surprising to me, is that I felt more calm as a father than I ever did working in the office, working with people in the office, or, you know, as part of a company. So everything you're saying makes sense to me.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
My nephew is my my text message, you know,
Thank you.
my text message ringtone. So
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. It always amazes me how self-confidence doesn't transfer. Like it doesn't at all,
yeah.
right? Like you can be so capable in one area of your life, and you would think that that would just sort of like give you a sense of strength and self-confidence and determination. But then you go and do even something that seems closely related. At least I'm this way. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one, but like suddenly, like we have a garden right outside of my office here. In the office, I'm capable, I'm powerful, I know what's going on. I step outside of this office to do gardening, and suddenly I'm doing all the stuff that I tell my students not to do. I have a scarcity mindset. I don't want to try things. I'm not open to new approaches. I'm afraid. I just want the answer. I want someone to tell me what to do. It's like my entire persona collapses the minute that I walk out of my comfortable little, you know, safe space. But on the other hand, I think it's kind of fortunate too. It's kind of fortunate, like it's growth opportunities all throughout life.
But Tiago, it's also true that you are a chef in certain spaces and an apprentice in other spaces, and it's okay.
Yes.
I know that I want to learn certain things about cooking or gardening or what. Like I have to be student in some place. That's okay. It's not even a matter of confidence. It's a matter of it's okay to be the non-expert in certain places, and then you will get that into your muscle memory, and then you'll teach it, and then your mastery will go like that.
Yes.
So I would look forward to your gardening class next year.
If I really wanted to learn gardening, I would teach a class on gardening. That would be the yeah, it's very true. We can all be students and masters at the same time in different domains. It's beautiful. Let's hear from Layla.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Mine is probably a slightly at the flip side of Dean's question, is that I also have a young child and her friends who hang out at my place. How do we teach kind of this mise-en-place idea in terms of organization to kids? She's 13, so her friends are teenagers, and a tricky age, I find. But how do we kind of impart that idea of mise-en-place to kids?
It's tricky in all ages. I remember for a family meal, I wanted to give certain tasks to my 10-year-old. And I just created a list for him to follow. It was like boil a dozen eggs, boil and peel a dozen eggs. And I knew certain things had to happen like first, right? Like if you want the eggs to be peelable, the water has to be boiling right when you dip the eggs in. So I just went through and I did my mise-en-place and made him a list to follow so that hopefully he would internalize all that. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer necessarily for you. It's one way that I try to teach it, or sometimes I'll see him, you know, this is a thing that he does. He'll try to engage in some activity while holding something else in this hand. I'm like, you know, you're going to need two hands to do that. Why don't you put that down so that you can get both your hands on this other thing? And these are all, it just shows you that these are all learned behaviors, right? They don't come naturally to us. And yet we expect people, once they get into a work environment, to just know it. Oh, you know, I can close that window. I can press pause on that report. I can push back on this. I can stop doing this before I start doing this other thing. They don't come naturally. We do have to teach it. And you know, like the old Estonian proverb says, the work teaches you how to do it. So the more that we make the idea of things have an order present to our kids, they'll internalize it. But they have to learn, you know, sometimes they have to learn the hard way. If you're trying to hold on to this thing while you do the other thing, you're going to break this thing that you're holding on to, or break the thing that you're trying to manipulate. Does that make sense?
Yes, so it's basically modeling the behavior as well,
Yeah.
verbalizing while you're talking about it, while you're doing it.
Can you talk about one thing that you've tried to do with your kids?
Well, the only thing at the moment that she can cook is instant noodles.
Still,
So
there's an order to that.
yes, so the first time I suppose when she made it, she was prepping all the other stuff. It's like, well, the pot's not on the stove yet, darling.
That's it. See, and a lot of the stuff that I've learned with regard to mise en place, both in and outside the kitchen, has come from moments like, oh yeah, dinner's not going to be ready until 8 o'clock, y'all, because I really didn't plan this well. I didn't turn the oven on. I didn't, I forgot this ingredient at the store. So yeah, but thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to know the answer to that question as well, because my son is 10 months old, so I don't know if he can learn mise yet, but at some point. Cool. Okay, let's hear from Mark.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Dan. It's a pleasure to hear from you. The mini chapter in Work Clean about a day without mise en place still gives me nightmares every so often.
People say that. People say it's very traumatic.
It's very visceral. Yeah. So my question is, I was wondering, kind of in line with what you're saying about, a year of immersion versus a year of procedure, other ways in which your thinking has changed or evolved since writing Work Clean. If it's because, the mise en place ends up being kind of a leaky abstraction, or just it's so robust and you're finding kind of new ways of applying it and thinking about it.
I would say the latter. It ain't leaky at all. It's been around for at least 100 years as part of our culinary culture, a very insular culture. And I find that I just find new levels on which these principles work, and allowing yourself to, I guess, what it is, allowing myself not to have the daily routine, which has been a huge part of my spiritual life for the last 30 years. To allow myself not to do certain things on a daily level, and I'll still be okay, because I have a larger view in many ways of what a day is, I guess. I need to have a space, maybe, and it sounds horrible, not to be my brother's keeper for a while. Mm-hmm. Let that sink in, right? Especially in the kinds of political environments that we're in right now, it can be very hard to let go of that sense of urgency and feeling like we've got to do something. Just remember, even at war, soldiers are in combat and then they're brought off the line, right? Because you can't continue to battle day after day after day after day. If you've ever read anything like by Stephen Ambrose, Band of Brothers, like getting yourself off of the front lines is really important, whether it means taking a break from social media, taking a break from your daily routine, taking a break from certain, tasks. It's important, and we are fluid, as Tiago has said. So that would be it for me. The larger mise en place of allowing yourself to have larger periods of intensive work where you're actually not doing planning work and process work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense in terms of giving yourself space also for reflection.
Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
It really strikes me, that analogy to seasons, because I think I have this in mind because of the Olympics. Like, it's really interesting to hear I love the backstories in the Olympics are way better than anything that happens at the Olympics. It's all about the stories. And they have on and off seasons. And it's very sensitive. Like the fact that the Olympics was postponed really mess with a lot of people, because they'll structure like years in advance so that their performance peak builds, peaks right in that time period, and then it kind of degrades. And it's really striking to me that like we now have this concept that there's elite knowledge workers, right? There's like the 10x engineer, there's the one designer or the one developer who's much better than the average, and yet we don't have seasons. We go all year long, year after year after year. There's no off season. Like if in the US, maybe you have 2 weeks of vacation, like if you're lucky. We never turn off, and we're still expected to perform at this elite level.
It's it's sad, but also great that you recognize it. And there just has to be a way for us to allow ourselves to do that.
Christoph, let's hear from you.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Tiago. Hi, everyone. I just have one short question regarding whether, Dan, do you know anything about the effectiveness of your book on people's lives in terms of their reading it, feeling it, and then actively changing? The reason I'm asking is that I read this book, it resonated with me, shared with my boss, and then my boss bought a copy for everyone in our team. And that's an old tradition in management. People, managers sometimes buy Who Moved My Cheese or the the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And my boss bought yours for everyone, but I'm afraid this is perhaps not the best way to go about improving people's organization. And I just wonder whether you have any information or any feedback about how just pushing people to try to use your method works or not.
Got it. Well, first, I'd like to ask you a question. Since your boss did that, have you experienced any particular changes or observed any changes around you, or has it pretty much been sort of status quo?
Unfortunately, it stayed status quo. I mean, I changed because I really embraced the idea, but apart from a couple of keywords repeated on the first month of meetings, nothing really changed. And I'm just not sure whether it works for everyone. The ideas are universally applicable, but sometimes it's just not enough to read the book. And I just wonder whether you have any info on how it works for others in other contexts.
Well, listen, I could imagine, and it's funny, it's one of my sort of worst case scenarios, right? Is some executive reading the book, maybe on a surface level, and deciding that this is what all my people need. Let me give this to my people, right? Which is not a chefly move, right? Chefs acquire the expertise and model the expertise and create loops of expectation. Not only loops of expectation, but loops of feedback and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not just a take, it's not just an expectation. It flows both ways. The chef also delivers to their people as well. So I was worried that, it would be taken by some person in power and sort of sprinkled down as this top-down kind of thing, but without the modeling of the ideas behind it. Now, mise-en-place is a very internal thing. There are some cooks who have great mise-en-place, and some cooks who do not have very good mise-en-place. And unfortunately, those are the people who will not survive in a professional kitchen, because you need it in order to survive. The thing about corporate America is you don't actually need a good mise-en-place to keep your damn job. As you can see around you, there's a lot of people who just kind of get by. Mise-en-place is hard. It's difficult. There is no easy answer. That's another thing I've learned, is that when I started this thing, I was like, oh, if I could only create the best app, that would sort of incorporate, unite the calendar with the task and the this and the that. And it would just make everything so clear. And the fact of the matter is, there's no app that's going to save us. There's no, you are the app, right? There's no book that you can read. You're the person who has to run that program, right? If Stephen Covey says to you, big rocks first, you're the person who's going to have to put your big rocks first, right? And if that doesn't work for you, then you're the person who's going to have to find the other system. Oh, it's not really about big rocks first. It's about putting things where they belong in time. Like, that's how to do it. But you're going to have to run the system that I talk about as well. It's you. It's always been you. So I forget the name of the gentleman who asked the question. Was it Christoph? You have found that you have a particular resonance with this plan because you also have the fortitude and the discipline to stick with it. But that's what you need for everything, right? The reason that we don't see it as a culture a lot of times is that culture often comes from either a groundswell, people uniting together to create it, or a really good modeling from top down. So I'm just proud that you have been able to resonate with it. As far as a survey of knowing how people have been affected by this book, I am constantly surprised at where and when and who have read this book and been touched by it. And there is definitely a part of me that feels like, okay, this is work on my own that needs to be continued. And part of my coming out of my 2 years of writing this book that I just finished is, okay, maybe now is the time to think about that, right? How do we continue this work? How do we continue to spread the gospel of personal mise-en-place to folks?
I was thinking, how sometimes corporate teams will go to like a luxury hotel to learn customer service. I would love if there was a way to take my team to a kitchen and we're going to spend a day actually performing and learning mise-en-place.
Yep. It's funny. I talked about that a little bit with Michael Ruhlman, who's another hero of mine, pretty famous chef, author. And yeah, it's definitely an idea whose time may have indeed arrived. Let's see.
Let's hear from Grace.
Hi. I just wanted to pass something on. Many years ago, when I was very, very busy, I was raising a couple of kids on my own. I was working full time. I was studying for the bar exam and dating the man who later became my second husband. I wrote out a little saying. I actually printed it out on a Dymo label maker, which shows you how long ago this was. And it says, not everything worth doing is worth doing well, much less perfectly. And I used it for years to guide me. Okay, you make the bed because otherwise it looks like, the lost weekend or something. But you don't have to make the bed perfectly. You just kind of put the cover on. You make dinner, but it doesn't have to be mise-en-place. It can be hamburger helper.
Mm-hmm.
But, it got me through for years and years. And I still kind of remember that. Just passing it on.
I think that's great. And I think that goes to it's wise. It's probably hard earned on your part. I can't believe all the stuff you've done. It's incredible, Grace. I'm right proud to know you. And I think that's also the ebb and flow on a micro level, right? There are some things we're going to do well, and there are some things we're going to do to a particular degree. And I very much identify with the making the bed part of it. If I can just stretch out that cover enough so that you know, my partner won't lose her mind when she walks into the bedroom because she needs things spick and span, you know, in order to think. And I don't necessarily need that, but I do it to that particular degree, and it's okay. It's okay, right? There are some things that we want to do well, and mostly we want to do them well because it's our trade. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel proficient. But you get to select what that is. It doesn't have to be everything. Yeah. I salute you, Grace. That's great. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. It's profound and not easy to stand up and say, right? Because the narrative is no, you must never give up, never retreat, never let one thing slide, even one little bit. But it's just like Dan was saying before, it's not honest. It's not realistic. I feel like when I was like 25, I wanted to reinvent like 90% of life. Like, I'm going to reinvent relationships. I'm going to reinvent travel. I'm going to reinvent this and that, health, all these things. When I was 30, I decided like 50-50. 50%, I'll just accept the way things are done and I'll reinvent 50%. And then I do these annual reviews every year. And this last annual review, I was like, you know what? There's only 3 things I want to reinvent. There's 3 things in life, which is ideas about knowledge management, my own personal growth, and the way that I raise and educate my son. So everything else in life, I just want to do the way it's always been done, accept the tradition, do what my parents did. So I'm down to like 3% of life that I'm trying to reinvent.
That's good. It's a good decision.
It's certainly less stressful. It's much less stressful. Let's hear from Tony.
Hi, thanks. Going to get, I guess, a little more pedestrian in this question and less big picture. But first, I have to say, Dan, I haven't actually read your book. The metaphor resonates with me. I've heard it before. It was really Tiago's blog post that alerted me to this conversation. And I think I responded to him. I'm a software engineer, and I can see a lot of parallels with some of the software practices with agile. Small steps, iterations, small precise movements, those kinds of things. Sequencing is important. So I was wondering, tooling, I think is kind of not necessarily a gap, but something I didn't see that I think can very much fit into the metaphor, the mise-en-place metaphor. Everyone, but particularly with respect to knowledge workers. Mm-hmm. Your setup, your tooling, your efficiency with your traversal of your information space is kind of a key thing. And so I'm wondering if you see how that, how does that fit with the metaphor?
I need an education from you. I've actually never heard the word tooling before. Oh. I mean, in that particular, can you explain to me what that is?
So I would recommend the book, The Pragmatic Programmer. Okay. It's an old classic at this point, but basically it's as a software engineer, I should really only do something manually once, and then I should build my tools to do it for me. I should automate my testing. I should. Got it. And then as a small agile group, we should be building little features and delivering real value, getting to that 100%. But then we should be feeding back and figuring out how can we do it better next time. Do we invest in automating this little piece, which kind of gets a little beyond the kitchen kind of metaphor, but I do think tooling is just as important in a, are we going induction, or you need the gas stove?
Yeah, no, but it's right on the money for so many things, so many practices that have evolved in the professional kitchen over the last 100 years. That's what kitchens do. They tool up, and part of the tooling, if you can see a particular technique as a tool, like a way to, let me see if I can sort of, like many people over the course of the pandemic, I learned to bake bread, sourdough, right? So my wife was the person who started it. She made the starter and got everything started. But I was the person who was like, okay, I'm going to perfect it. And so much of what I do is embodied technique, that there's a certain, now I have certain tools that are available to me that I didn't have in the kitchen before, a cloche, particularly large jar for the starter. These are things that I've institutionalized so that when it comes time to bake bread, it happens more automatically than if I were sort of starting from scratch every time. And yes, it just sounds like you're in a great team. It sounds like you're in a team that thinks deeply about where do we put the effort towards automating something, and where is it just not worth that kind of investment to do it?
Yeah, I'm actually not in the team at all right now. I've led a lot of teams in the past, but I'm off by myself trying to build a personal productivity tool. So
there you see, there you go. And you reminded me of this thing from when I was in the record business, and I promoted records for a living, which meant I had to call radio stations. Remember radio stations? I had to call radio stations across the country to see if they were gonna, play my record, or DJs, radio stations, whatever. And anybody remember FileMaker Pro? It was like this old software where you could customize the fields and you can make it look good. And I must have spent, I don't know, 2 months of weekends in the office working on this stupid FileMaker Pro thing that in the end, wasn't worth the effort. I could have been spending that time, talking to these DJs, flying out to meet them, bribing them somehow with steaks and snow tires, as we used to do in the music business. It could have been used in so many other ways that were more productive than getting the right tools. So I've seen it from both sides.
Yeah, there's a great XKCD where it's a 2-dimensional grid, and it's like the amount of times you do this thing versus how long it would take to automate it. And it's like, is it worth, if you do this thing once a month and it takes an extra hour, but it's going to take you a week to automate it, then it's not worth doing.
I want to be on your team, man.
I'll find it and put a pointer in here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm well known for my fierce opposition to spaced repetition and other memorization schemes. And the reason is I lived in Russian-speaking Ukraine for over 2 years and used countless hours to build the most elaborate spaced repetition flashcard system for learning Russian, probably hundreds of hours. And when I look back, I wish that I had spent that time doing almost anything else, like walking around town, going like in the market, playing with my students on the playground. I'm sure I would have learned Russian better if I had just wandered around rather than building this elaborate flashcard system.
Yeah. And by the way, that's the other reason that I recommend that our planning really not take more than 30 minutes a day. Because if you can look at planning as a kind of tooling as well. See, now I have this word, I'm going to use the word all the time. If your planning takes an hour a day, it's not planning anymore, or it's and it's also taking you away from the work. And hey, listen, if you love the work, if you just love making tools, then that's your trade, right? So you can look at it a little differently. But let's not get caught up in the illusion that making the perfect tool is the work.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great note to end on. We're at a time. So I want to just thank everyone for the excellent questions and your presence here. It's always much more exciting to do these conversations as a group. And Dan, I'm so appreciative of your time and your effort, not just writing the book, which was a huge contribution, but also joining us here. I really hope you all pick up the book. There's really the blog post that I wrote is like the very top of an iceberg. And there's so much more in there, especially the stories and the context and the quotes, which I didn't have time to include at all. Right. Like my post is just pure abstraction compared to the book. I think there's so much in common between our worlds, our multiple worlds. And it's just been a real pleasure speaking with you, Dan.
Well, the pleasure is mine. I am just so grateful to even have a little time with you and your community here, which is super strong, I can tell, and heart-centered, if I may say. Just very, very cool. It's my pleasure. The book is also available. It's funny that the publisher changed the title for the paperback, so you can also look under Everything in Its Place, and that's the paperback version of Work Clean. But both should be available on Amazon. And I'm always available on Twitter at Dan Charnas, DANCHARNAS. And it's just a pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Everyone, have a great end of your week, and I will see you later.